At 59, Dan thought he'd beaten the system. A buyout offer too good to refuse. A 401k balance that made his financial advisor smile. And a modest but comfortable condo in Sarasota, just 3 blocks from the beach. But just 18 months later, there he was, wearing a name tag, ringing up groceries at the local market, and wondering where his perfect retirement plan had gone so wrong. Dan isn't alone. Across America, a silent trend is unfolding. As thousands of once confident retirees find themselves quietly rejoining the workforce. They're becoming greeters at big box stores, baristas at coffee shops, administrative assistants, and delivery drivers, not for fulfillment or to pass the time, but out of financial necessity. These aren't stories of poor financial discipline or lavish spending. These are cautionary tales of good people who planned carefully, followed conventional wisdom, and still found themselves caught in retirement's most painful trap. Running out of money before running out of life. For some, it was the market volatility that derailed carefully constructed plans. For others, healthcare costs created an insurmountable burden. And for many, it was simply the cruel mathematics of inflation, compounded over decades. Whatever the cause, the outcome is the same. The retirement they worked toward for 40 years evaporating, just when they should be enjoying it most. Today, we're sharing 5 true stories of retirees who thought they were ready. People who did the math, consulted the experts, and still found themselves back in the workforce during what should have been their golden years. Their experiences offer valuable lessons for anyone approaching retirement, or anyone already there and sensing the first signs of financial strain. Because the difference between retiring once and retiring right often comes down to factors that traditional planning overlooks. Let's begin with Dan's story. A tale that starts with optimism, but serves as a warning about the dangers of retiring into a bull market. Dan had worked for the same telecommunications company for nearly 26 years when the restructuring announcement came. His department was being consolidated, and employees over 55 were being offered an early retirement package. 1 year's salary as severance, plus accelerated pension vesting. At 59, with a 401k worth just over $950,000, and a pension that would pay $2,800 monthly starting at 62, Dan saw an opportunity he couldn't refuse. The numbers looked great on paper, Dan recalled. My financial advisor ran projections showing I could withdraw 4% annually from my portfolio, plus my pension in a few years, and live comfortably until I was 95. It was March 2021, and the markets were at all-time highs after rebounding from the brief pandemic downturn. Dan's portfolio had never looked better. With his mortgage nearly paid off and no other significant debt, the path seemed clear. He accepted the buyout, celebrated with colleagues, and made the move to Florida he and his wife had been planning for years. The first 6 months were everything Dan had imagined retirement would be. Mornings at the beach, afternoons on the golf course, evenings exploring local restaurants. He and his wife Judy joined a community center, made new friends, and began settling into their new life. But by late 2021, Dan noticed something concerning when reviewing his quarterly statements. The markets had turned volatile. His portfolio had dropped nearly 12% in just a few months. My advisor told me not to worry, Dan remembered. He said market corrections are normal, and we had built in a safety margin. What Dan didn't fully appreciate was how a market downturn early in retirement can devastate even a well-funded portfolio. What financial planners call sequence of returns risk. Because Dan was now withdrawing money instead of adding to his investments, each market dip meant selling assets at lower prices, leaving fewer shares to recover when the market eventually rebounded. By mid-2022, Dan's $950,000 nest egg had shrunk to around $780,000. Not catastrophic, but concerning enough that Dan began cutting back on expenses. The golf membership was the first to go, followed by dining out and travel plans. But the real shock came from an unexpected source: the rapid inflation that hit the economy. Suddenly, groceries were costing 20% more. The Homeowners Association raised fees by 15% to cover increased maintenance costs. And when their air conditioning unit failed during a heat wave, the replacement cost was nearly double what they had budgeted in their home repair fund. We went from feeling financially secure to watching every penny in less than a year, Judy explained. Dan started talking about going back to work after we had to cancel a trip to see our grandchildren because of airfare increases. The job search at 60 was nothing like Dan had expected. His decades of telecommunications experience meant little to employers looking for current technical skills. Interviews were scarce, and offers were scarcer. After 3 months of searching, the only position he could secure was as a part-time cashier at a local grocery store, 25 hours weekly at $14 an hour. I try to work the early morning shift so fewer people I know will see me, Dan admitted, the shame evident in his voice. I know that's prideful, but it's hard to explain to friends that I'm back working an entry-level job after being a department director. Dan's situation highlights a critical retirement planning error: basing withdrawal rates on portfolio values during market peaks, and failing to build in sufficient buffers for market volatility. Had he waited just 1 more year to retire, or reduced his initial withdrawal rate to 3% instead of 4%, his retirement might have remained on track despite the market downturn. But timing, as they say, is everything. And Dan's retirement timing couldn't have been worse. While Dan's story centers around market timing and sequence of returns risk, our next retiree faced a different challenge, one that millions of Americans confront, but few adequately prepare for. Barbara taught high school English in Ohio for 31 years. She loved her students, but the increasing administrative demands and standardized testing requirements had slowly eroded her passion for teaching. At 58, with her state pension secured and a modest 403(b) account, she decided it was time to start the next chapter of her life. I calculated everything carefully, Barbara said. My pension would be $3,900 monthly, not luxurious, but enough to cover my basic expenses. Her 403(b) held approximately $310,000, which she planned to leave untouched until age 65, allowing it to grow for future healthcare costs and inflation protection. What Barbara didn't fully account for was the gap in healthcare coverage between her retirement at 58 and Medicare eligibility at 65. Her school district offered retiree health insurance, but at full cost. Nearly $950 monthly for a single person. I knew it would be expensive, Barbara acknowledged, but I thought I could manage it for 7 years until Medicare kicked in. What she couldn't have anticipated was how quickly those premiums would rise. Within 2 years, her monthly premium had increased to $1,200, with higher deductibles and copays. A routine knee surgery left her with $6,000 in out-of-pocket costs, forcing her to dip into her 403(b) earlier than planned. Then came the diagnosis she never expected: early-stage breast cancer. The treatment was successful, thankfully. But even with insurance, her portion of the costs exceeded $15,000. More withdrawals from her retirement account followed, triggering taxes and penalties for early distribution. By age 62, Barbara's carefully constructed financial plan was in shambles. Her 403(b) had dwindled to less than $200,000, and the increased insurance costs were consuming nearly a third of her monthly pension. I realized I had 2 choices, Barbara explained. I could continue drawing down my savings until nothing was left, or I could find a way to earn income again. She began substitute teaching, ironically returning to the profession she had left, but now without the benefits or job security. The pay was modest, about $120 per day, but even working 3 days weekly made a significant difference in her financial situation. Later, she added online tutoring in the evenings, specializing in helping students with college application essays. "It's not how I envisioned spending my 60s, Barbara admitted. "But it's actually not terrible. I get to work with students without all the bureaucratic nonsense. That drove me away from full-time teaching." Barbara's experience highlights a critical gap in many retirement plans. Underestimating healthcare costs, particularly in the years before Medicare eligibility. According to recent estimates, a 65-year-old couple retiring today might need approximately $315,000 saved specifically for healthcare costs during retirement. And that's after Medicare coverage begins. For those retiring earlier, the figure can be substantially higher. Had Barbara worked even 3 more years, or built a larger healthcare-specific fund before retiring, her situation might have been very different. But like many education professionals, she faced a retirement system that incentivized earlier departure, without fully accounting for the healthcare cost gap that would follow. While Barbara's return to work was prompted by healthcare costs, our next retirees faced a challenge that's becoming increasingly common among today's seniors: supporting adult children well into retirement years. Robert and Diane had built what they thought was an unshakable retirement plan. His career as an engineer, and hers in hospital administration, had allowed them to accumulate substantial savings. Nearly $1.2 million in retirement accounts, plus a paid-off home in suburban Denver, valued at approximately $750,000. They retired together at 62, planning to travel extensively, while they were still young and healthy enough to enjoy it. Their financial advisor assured them they could safely withdraw $60,000 annually from their investments, which, combined with Robert's pension of $42,000 per year, would provide a comfortable 6-figure income. The first 2 years of retirement were everything they had dreamed of. They visited national parks across the western United States, spent a month in Europe, and enjoyed weekday tea times at golf courses. That had been too crowded during their working years. Then came the call that would ultimately derail their carefully planned retirement. Their son Michael, 38, was going through a difficult divorce, with legal bills mounting, and the housing market in his California city making it impossible to afford a place of his own. He asked if he could move back home temporarily, bringing his 2 children, ages 8 and 10, with him. "What were we supposed to say?" Diane asked rhetorically. "These are our grandchildren. Our son was in crisis. Of course we said yes. What was intended to be a 3-month arrangement stretched into a year, then 2. Robert and Diane found themselves effectively raising their grandchildren, while Michael worked long hours, trying to rebuild his career. After the emotional and financial devastation of his divorce, the financial impact was substantial. Their utility bills doubled, grocery expenses tripled. The modest 3-bedroom home that had felt spacious for 2 retirees was now cramped with 5 people. Plans for downsizing were postponed indefinitely. Even more significantly, Robert and Diane found themselves covering many of Michael's expenses. Everything from helping with his legal bills to buying clothes and school supplies for the grandchildren. "We never formally added it up," Robert admitted. "But looking back, we probably gave Michael close to $50,000 over those first 2 years. It wasn't one big check. It was 1,000 small expenses that just became part of our daily life." Their travel plans were shelved. Their withdrawal rate crept up to 6%, well beyond what experts consider sustainable for a retirement that might last 30 years or more. When their financial advisor warned them they were on an unsustainable path, they faced a difficult reality. "He showed us projections that we would run out of money by our mid-80s if we continued at that rate," Diane recalled. "That was terrifying. We have longevity in both our families. My mother lived to 97 years. The solution was painful but necessary. Robert returned to engineering work as a consultant, taking on projects that could be managed remotely. Diane found a part-time position managing medical records at a local clinic. Together, they added approximately $65,000 annually to their income, enough to offset their excessive withdrawals and begin rebuilding their financial security. The situation improved when Michael eventually secured a better-paying position and moved his family into their own apartment after 3 years with his parents. But the damage to Robert and Diane's retirement portfolio had been done. Their $1.2 million had dwindled to just under $950,000. A significant setback that would require years of reduced withdrawals to recover from. "We don't regret helping our son," Robert emphasized, "but we wish we had been more structured about it, perhaps setting up a formal loan with repayment terms, or at least tracking exactly what we were spending." Their story highlights an increasingly common retirement risk that few financial plans adequately address: the financial impact of supporting adult children and grandchildren. A recent study found that 79% of parents with adult children provide some form of financial support, with housing, living expenses, and education being the most common categories. For retirees, this support can quickly transform a solid financial plan into an unsustainable one. Robert and Diane's partial return to work has stabilized their situation, allowing them to continue helping Michael occasionally, while protecting their long-term security. But their retirement dreams have been permanently altered. "We'll never get those early retirement years back," Diane reflected. "Those were supposed to be our prime travel years, when we were still energetic and healthy." Robert nodded in agreement, adding, "If we could go back, we'd still help Michael, but with clearer boundaries." Love doesn't have to mean open-ended financial support. While family financial pressures derailed Robert and Diane's retirement, our next retiree's story centers around a different miscalculation, one involving Social Security timing and the real cost of living in retirement. Margaret worked as a retail manager for most of her career, overseeing departments in several major chain stores. Never married and without children, she focused on building her financial independence, diligently contributing to her company's 401k plan, and maintaining a modest lifestyle. By age 62, she had accumulated approximately $420,000 in retirement savings and paid off the mortgage on her small townhouse in suburban Atlanta. Her plan seemed straightforward: claim Social Security at 62, supplement it with withdrawals from her retirement accounts, and enjoy a quiet, comfortable retirement, filled with gardening, reading, and occasional travel to visit friends. "My financial planning was pretty basic," Margaret admitted. "I calculated that between Social Security and withdrawing about 4% from my savings each year, I'd have around $3,300 monthly to live on. My expenses were only about $2,800 monthly when I was working, so it seemed like more than enough." What Margaret didn't fully appreciate was that her expenses while working were artificially lowered by workplace benefits. Health insurance with minimal employee contributions, free meals in the employee cafeteria, and retailer discounts that significantly reduced her clothing and household expenses. When these benefits disappeared, her actual cost of living jumped significantly. Health insurance through the Affordable Care Act marketplace cost $580 monthly until Medicare eligibility, more than triple what she had paid through her employer plan. Without employee discounts, her everyday expenses increased by about 20%, and inflation that began accelerating in 2021 further eroded her purchasing power. But the most consequential decision was claiming Social Security at 62, rather than waiting until her full retirement age of 66 and 8 months, or even age 70. "I thought I was being smart by claiming early," Margaret explained. "I kept hearing, 'Take it while you can get it,' from friends and co-workers." That decision permanently reduced her monthly benefit from what would have been $2,800 at full retirement age to just $1,960, a 30% reduction. That would affect her income for the rest of her life. By 64, just 2 years into retirement, Margaret realized her financial situation was unsustainable. Her retirement account had dipped below $380,000 due to market fluctuations and withdrawals higher than she had planned. Her monthly expenses consistently exceeded her income, forcing her to withdraw more than the recommended 4% annually. I did the math and realized I might run out of money in my late 70s, Margaret said. And with my family history, I could easily live into my 90s. Returning to retail management wasn't an option. The physical demands of standing for long shifts had become difficult as arthritis settled into Margaret's knees and hips. Instead, she found an unexpected solution through a former colleague. She had started a small bookkeeping service for local businesses and needed help, Margaret explained. I had always handled the department budgeting and inventory tracking, so the skills transferred well. Working 20 to 25 hours weekly from home, Margaret now earns approximately $1,800 monthly, enough to avoid further withdrawals from her retirement accounts, while covering her essential expenses. I'm actually letting my remaining investments grow now, which gives me tremendous peace of mind, she noted. And because I'm past my Social Security earnings limit, I can earn without reducing my benefits. Margaret's plan is to continue working until age 70, then reassess her situation. By then, her retirement accounts will hopefully have recovered somewhat, and she'll be past the most expensive pre-Medicare healthcare years. Her story illustrates several common retirement planning errors: underestimating actual living expenses, failing to account for the loss of workplace benefits, and making Social Security decisions without fully understanding their long-term implications. Had Margaret waited until her full retirement age to claim Social Security and worked even part-time for those additional years, her financial situation would be significantly more secure. Instead, her reduced benefit is locked in for life, a permanent consequence of a decision made without complete information. I tell everyone who will listen now, don't claim Social Security early unless you absolutely have to, Margaret advised. Those few years of patience can make a tremendous difference in your lifetime income. While the previous stories illustrate various retirement planning pitfalls, our final story offers a counterpoint. A retiree who built flexibility into his plan from the beginning and has weathered retirement's inevitable surprises without financial crisis. James retired from his position as a community college professor at age 63, after teaching business courses for over 3 decades. Like many in education, his pension formed the foundation of his retirement security. Approximately $4,200 monthly after taxes. He had also accumulated about $380,000 in a 403(b) retirement account and owned his home outright. A modest 3-bedroom ranch in a mid-sized Midwest city. But unlike many retirees, James never saw retirement as a complete cessation of earning. I always planned to work part-time during at least the first decade of retirement, he explained. Not because I had to financially, but because I wanted the structure and social connection. The extra income just gave me more options. Before retiring from full-time teaching, James had already established a small consulting practice, helping local small businesses with strategic planning and marketing. This business required minimal overhead and allowed him to control his hours and client load. I structured it to generate about $1,500 to $2,000 monthly, working maybe 10 hours a week, James said, enough to cover my discretionary spending, while leaving my pension for essential expenses, and my investments untouched to grow for later years. This approach created a 3-tiered retirement income strategy. Tier 1, pension covered all essential living expenses. Tier 2, consulting income funded travel, hobbies, and gifts for his grandchildren. Tier 3. Retirement investments remained untouched, growing for future healthcare needs or long-term care. When the market declined in 2022, James wasn't forced to sell investments at depressed prices. When inflation spiked, he could take on an additional client or two to offset increased costs. And when his daughter needed a loan to start her own business, he could help without compromising his own security. The consulting income gives me tremendous peace of mind, James reflected. If my car breaks down or the roof needs repair, I don't have to stress about where the money will come from. James plans to gradually reduce his consulting work as he moves through his 70s, eventually phasing it out entirely. By then, his retirement investments should have grown substantially, allowing for comfortable withdrawals if needed. I see so many friends who viewed retirement as a binary switch. One day working full-time, the next day earning nothing, he observed. That approach leaves no margin for error, no buffer against surprises. These 5 stories highlight various paths to the same destination: retirees finding themselves back in the workforce after believing their earning years were behind them. For Dan, it was market timing and sequence of returns risk. For Barbara, unexpected healthcare costs before Medicare eligibility. For Robert and Diane, financial support for adult children that exceeded their plans. For Margaret, claiming Social Security too early and underestimating true living costs. And for James, a planned approach to continued earning. That provided flexibility rather than necessity. Their collective experiences offer valuable insights. For anyone approaching retirement, or recently retired and feeling uncertain, because what makes retirement sustainable isn't just how much you've saved, it's how well you prepare for what can't be predicted. If this video helped you, give it a like. And subscribe to Goldprint, Stories of Life After the Paycheck. We post real retirement stories every day. And let us know in the comments. Do you think you'll need to work again after retiring? Your story might help someone else plan better for the future.